All right.
Can that hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Is it on?
You're good to go.
Okay, we're going to talk to Dennis Richardson. Uh, he he's from a coal mining history family, so uh, I'm sure we want to find out about all of them. But can you? When did the first Richardson come? About what year?
1854, Hudson Bay found out they had coal in Nanaimo, BC, so they went to England and recruited coal miners, which was my great-grandfather, and I think his brother. And so they signed this indenture. They would work 5 years and they'd get some piece of land. So they packed up their families and sailed. Took about a year to get here, just long and slow, and it was an arduous trip because the family couldn't get up on deck, just the men if they needed help. Everybody had to stay down in this ship hole for the whole time. And so they ended up in Nanaimo, and then they said, here's your miner's house, we'll see you at the mine tomorrow. And so they come and started working with which was their trade, coal. And my grandfather was born in Nanaimo, and he ended up living in Ravensdale, and he had he met my grandmother through what passed as online dating back in 1907, you know, and so they got together. I got her letters to him for over a year. They wrote, but she didn't keep his. So anyway, and they each had 3 kids, and then they had my dad in 1911 in Ravensdale. And so Abe was a coal miner, and when the mine blew, it kind of ended Ravensdale coal mining as it was. And by then, he was probably getting close to 60, so he wasn't really up for the work. And so everybody was in the same boat in mining towns. There wasn't a lot of money. And so my mother and dad married in 1937, and they moved to Black Diamond. I was born in Auburn, but we lived at Black Diamond at the time, and I grew up in Black Diamond. It was in, I don't remember the 40s, but in the 50s, I can remember my first day of school, and it was the old brick building, and it was a contained town. And if you look, there's a picture of Black Diamond in 1946, and it was what I grew up in. Nothing around it. No sprawl, no houses, some farms, you know, out further. Franklin was done, there was nothing there. And so your childhood was spent doing whatever you wanted. Nobody cared if you went out in the woods, build cabins, or whatever you wanted to do. We liked to fish. There was a little lake called Mud Lake that got washed out in the 70s. Which was made by the coal company for water supply to the mine. And we fished there, made rafts, always warned, stay off the rafts, makeshift rafts, you know, even after we could swim. The school, in the summer, sponsored swimming lessons. They had instructors at Lake 12, there was a resort there, and school bus would take you there for 2 weeks, and you got swimming lessons. And the whole town went, Lake Sawyer kids went, you know. You were pretty contained. So most days, you could go out the door and just find something to do. And in the summertime, we played baseball. The kids from Lawson Hill would come down. You know, we'd have a baseball game. We used to catch a ride in the coal trucks going up to the mine in Franklin and fish in the river all day, and then catch a coal miner coming home or walk home. You know, usually caught whitefish, by the way. And then we tried to do things like pick blackberries for money to go to the fair, and we ended up having blackberry fights all day. And we made a couple bucks, maybe, you know. And the school took everybody to the Shallop Fair. We usually broke by 9 o'clock and spent a long day moping around, you know, but it was fun. Kids pretty much got along. There were some in and out things with some people, as there always is. And they were really lifelong friends. There was nothing, other than Little League, there was really nothing organized. You didn't have any soccer, football, anything like that, except what we played in the ball field. And usually they were same thing, pickup games. You get 3 or 4 kids and you'd be out there, you know, playing. Everybody, you went to people's houses, nobody locked the door. And some houses you just walked in, others you knocked on the door because they, you know, maybe the dad was grumpy or something, and you thought, we better be careful here. It was a bedroom community. People worked and drove, you know, other than the store and a few businesses around town. The Carnino Brothers Garage, Carl's Garage, there's 4 taverns in, you know, walking distance, and some old miners, that's what they did, walk from one to the other after they retired, you know, during the day. Cars were a big thing, you know, nobody had anything. It was just old jalopies, but you could dream. I used to go, when I was in high school, I went to Carnino Brothers Garage, and 2 Italian brothers that, it was very different. If you so much as said damn in front of a woman, it'd brain you with a tire iron, I think, because it was very different, you know. And so we'd go down there, and pretty soon you're changing oil in customers' cars and pumping gas and doing everything, you know. And I still owe him money, even though I think I probably maybe earned it. But it was kind of like they were good adults. They taught you things, and they were, some things about today are so bizarre to me because you're just brought up in a different level, you know. My mother stayed home. My dad worked. When you needed a shot, Dr. Bott's was the place you went. And he had a little office. He did his own pharmacy stuff. My mother got mad at him because he used to walk the streets on Saturday. If anybody needed him, he'd just walk up and down the street, you know. And I was sick, so my mother had him come in. He'd give me a penicillin shot. He charged her $5. Well, she'd never go back to him after that. Went to the guy in Enumclaw, you know. But most people did, you know. And there was a diphtheria outbreak where a kid in Morganville died of diphtheria, and they come out and they vaccinated every kid in town, you know. They just come out at the old Presbyterian church. That was a pretty exciting night. The church burned, and it caught fire because the furnace didn't have a stack shut off, so it didn't know it was overheating, and it was snowy and blowing and cold, and it was all old wood, varnished, you know. And so in 1959 it caught fire, and the town was like daylight out, and Carl Styrett had to go over on his garage roof and keep things from, you know, put out fires that were landing on from stuff burning. And it was just totally wiped it out. But it was a big event. You know, the whole town was there watching. There was pictures at the fire station, but I don't know where they went that night. And a guy named Bud Tilken took a movie of it, but I don't know where that went either. It'd be interesting to get. But anyway, the good news was we didn't have school that day because of the church fire. So we went up Mud Lake and walked around. That's another thing we're supposed to do, walk on the ice. And we were out there walking around. It's really cold. It's a cold winter. And it used to be we could ice skate out there. Only a couple kids had ice skates. Everybody just slid around, you know. And I think because of the isolation, you didn't have a lot of, a lot of crime particularly. Everybody went to the store over here for groceries. They delivered. It was a meat market, and everything rolled into one. My folks had a business for a little while when I was, right after I was born. We had turned on the Ravensdale Road. There was a gas station, store, and a house. And so they tried to get a business out of that, but it just didn't work. And so they ended up moving to a house where I grew up, right next to the ball field. You could ride your bike up and down Main Street on Sunday and nobody come by. Yeah, maybe you have to get off once in a while for a car, you know, but it was pretty quiet town. And people always said there's nothing for kids to do, but I never thought that. There's tons of stuff. There's lots of woods, places to fish. We had 22s. We went hunting, never shot anything, but maybe a duck or two, you know. But it just kept you busy, and it was nice. Now, when I was a kid, you'd say, well, can I go over on that? No, nobody cares. Now, everybody weighs in on everything, you know, and so it's kind of hard to explore like we had the liberty of doing. There was the pole line that went to the river up on Lawson Hill at the end of Watts Drive. We used to go up there to shoot and ride jeeps. It was just a big play day place, mud holes, you know, hills, everything you wanted to do to have fun. And it's still isolated. And it's too bad too, because it's a beautiful spot. There was the old cemetery up there, but I think that's, well, another story. It was out in the woods. It was miners. It's almost sad to see. We'll never forget on tombstones. Everybody's forgotten. You know. And like I said, Franklin was done. There was no. They had a coal mine there, but the town itself just evaporated in the 20s, pretty much. One old guy, I wish I'd taken a picture of it, lived in a house down by the bridge. His name was Kurt Woodard, and I think he just squatted in it. And after he died, Fred Elder bulldozed it down because it was just a derelict, you know. And so anyway, it was kind of a shame.
You said you picked some blackberries and
Yeah,
sold them. Who bought them?
A woman, her picture's in there when she was in high school. Her name was Alpha Johnson, and she lived up on Lawson Hill, and she would buy the berries from you. And she was a friend of the family. Of course, pretty much everybody was. But anyway, and she lived up there with her nephew and her mother in a house that's up where the houses are built now, just on top of Lawson Hill. They had a farm there, and they kind of had a hand-to-mouth thing, but she would get the berries, and then we'd get so much money. It was a lot of work for very little, but kids all over pick berries. You didn't get a lot. I mean, it's a lot of work. Anyway, we did that. We peeled cascara out in the woods and peeled cascara, and then you got to dry it, and you got to break it up, and you can't get it wet. And I can still go into an attic in town and smell where they'd dried cascara in there. It just, that smell never goes away. But I don't think you could work like heck to get a bag, big gunny sack full of it, stomp down as hard as you can, and you get 75 cents for it. And like, well, 75 cents was something then, but not a lot. You know, it wasn't worth the work. There were people in town that did that for a living. They peeled bark, and they also collect ferns and moss and things for florists. And it was more of a hobby. A lot of the old timers were fun characters. They just, there's a few grumpy ones. We took a pane, a window out of Joe Bartelli's wine shed, so we could crawl in when we're sleeping out, but I don't know, that stuff was awful. I don't know how big could drink. And I don't know what we're drinking, you know, it could have been his gas and oil for his lawnmower, I don't know. But he was such a nice old guy, and I don't think he cared, you know, he just let kids be kids. Rick Darby, a friend of mine, lived down the Main Street. He used to hop the fence to Albert Rossi's garden to get fresh peas and vegetables for his dinner. and a lot of the Italians really prided themselves on their gardening. And all these down here behind the museum that lived, and Duda, they had their truck farm right back here. And he come around and he peddled, Duda Venarelli, Didio I think was his name. He'd go around and he'd want to know, your mama wanted carrots, you want this, you want that, you know, and talk to the kids and try to sell stuff. And about the 1960, he had to give it up. It was just not profitable. Supermarkets were coming on, refrigeration, things that I think he got up early and went to Pike Place Market to buy produce and come and try to sell it, so it was probably pretty good stuff. I think the parents, Jack Hope, Jack Chilcott, Darby's, I think a lot of those put a lot of time into your baseball, Zoomics. It was important to them. The kids play baseball. Well, it was hard to get 9 kids, that would play. We were probably pretty good, but then other schools have dozens of kids to choose from, so they kind of get stiff competition. The school, the teachers, when I started, were really older, and I think one of them was pretty brutal, actually. I think they were just, didn't have any patience at all. And you couldn't be different. You had to be, everybody did the same. You weren't, now they look at kids and they try to figure out how to make them learn better. There, they just figured you're a knothead, but they couldn't find people to teach. There just was no money in it. They had teacher cottages where the post office is. There was 2 apartments for teachers. One guy, Mr. Swedberg, he lived in a basement, had to use the people's bathroom upstairs. And then where the police station was a little building, and that was a teacher's cottage. And at the end of the ball field, there was another one. So they had 4 or 5 houses that they would give you, to stay in. But it was just hard. If you got a teacher younger than 70, you were doing good. Until the later grades, it started changing. You got people that were just out of college that kind of had some savvy.
Would these teachers that lived in a cottage, would they stay all summer there?
Yeah, that was their home.
Okay.
Yeah, they were mostly just older women. When I was in the 6th grade, the guy Cub, he lived at Lake Sawyer, and he grew up in Diamond. He was my neighbor before he was a teacher, Hubbard. And then at the end of the field, there was another one, and several younger families lived in it. And the older ones, well, there was 2 at the post office, and one up by the police station. She got sick. I was in the 3rd grade, and they took us out because she got sick. And a woman I went to school with, Judy, said she died, but she was alive when I saw her. That was the last one out. But she's pretty old, and she never came back. We never saw her after that, so I don't know what happened. It was really, I hate to say it, but the bottom of the barrel for teachers. The school, we had intramural sports. We had long recesses, and it's just like 15 minutes seemed like forever when you were a kid to go out. You could get a baseball game going and everything else, and then you had to watch because you looked at the school and all the kids were gone. You knew that they were back in class, and you got to beat feet back there. The ball field was always a very centered thing in the town. They had town teams, baseball teams when I was a kid. They played every Saturday in baseball season, and they played Auburn, Kirkland, Renton. One year they had a Japanese team from Seattle come out and play. And one year they had a team from Seattle, and they just blew us away. They could hit the ball practically out of town. It just blew us away. And I think after that it was hard to get, the team were getting older, and other areas didn't have teams. We did find a few years where you could find some competition. But sadly, the day of the hometown baseball game went away.
Was your dad a coal miner?
When he was young and first married, he worked in the coal mines in Ravensdale. But he worked there for 10 years, but he didn't like it. And he went to work in the woods at Weyerhaeuser, White River, they call it then, mill in Enumclaw. And then he became a machinist at Pacific Car and Foundry, and he worked there until he died. And the city incorporated in '59, he was on the first council. For some reason, nobody ever took a picture of the first council. I got a picture that was in the paper, I think the PI paper, and Bill Combo wrote a story about my dad working on. In the early days, he would spend a lot of his stuff for nothing. And I can remember my mother holding the phone, somebody hollering her head off about something they don't like in town, and him coming home being very patient with people. Out on Saturday, Gomer Evans and Archie Ells went to Seattle, bought a grader for $300, drove it out to Black Diamond, and all the roads were dirt. You know, couldn't even hardly call it gravel. And Gomer would grade the roads, and sometimes I'd spend all Saturday riding around with him in the grader. And so it was kind of like people volunteered stuff. You know, there wasn't like now where you have to have a contract, you got to have lawyers. It's all changed. And but it was I don't know if it was a mistake to incorporate or not. It just wasn't ready. But the county never showed up, so you were paying taxes and getting nothing. And my mother always said they'd send a dump truck out with 3 guys in it and throw a teaspoon of gravel in the hole and leave. You know, I thought, well, okay. And people were mad. Garney Rath couldn't hunt ducks on Lake 14, so he was mad, even though the family down there was getting BBs bouncing off their roof on, you know, duck season. And a lot of people were attached to the county, and they worked there, and they didn't want to, you know, so they hollered. Usually the taverns, when I got married and come to town, I didn't have a young family. You don't have a lot of time to go. But Saturday morning, it was kind of a collection of old timers, and it was interesting to go and talk to them, you know. And these were people out here. They got pictures of people in school, and I know the parents of kids I knew are in those pictures, and people I knew a lot of times, or you know their name. You know, they were somebody that was in town and moved away. So anyway, it was nice. The town's changing. I don't object to that. We meet so many nice people here that live, you know, in the new areas around town. And I think it's just gonna happen, you know.
Was there a junior high here? You know, a grade school, yes. What about junior high?
No, they had Enumclaw didn't have a junior high when I went there. When I started school, they had 1 through 7. My sister was older. She went to Enumclaw in the 8th grade. And then a guy by the name of Fred Pedersen come, and he thought, well, we can do 8th grade here. So they had moved up 1 more grade. So I was through the 8th grade, and then you went to the high school as a 9th grader, which technically you're junior high, but nobody knew the difference. And my sophomore year, they built a new high school, and the old high school became a junior high. But Black Diamond had a great school. I don't remember it. It was tore down, I think, in the 30s. My sister don't, or 30s or 40s. My sister don't remember it. I can remember bulldozers pushing the sidewalks there, and they built a tennis court, which sat pretty much where the school sits now. When I was a kid, the fire station was over where this secondhand store is, right next door to here. And every Saturday morning, Tom Zimmy could walk over to the confectionery and turn the siren on to, you know, noon or thereabouts. And then I remember when I was early days of school, the building, they hired a guy, got a pretty good deal on a block building, and they built this building. They had bought a fire truck new, and then they also bought one that was a year old from Enumclaw. And I think the Enumclaw one is the one Joe Androsco has now. And I don't know why, a kid was hit and killed in Morgansville when I was a kid, and I swear I could see they had a Ford panel aid car, but nobody seemed to remember it but me. And so I don't know if that was true or not. They did have a 65 Chev, but that was long after that happened. But anyway, they did have the 2 fire engines. And when I joined the fire department, they were pretty bad, you know. When you have a volunteer system, you don't have somebody there to take care of things, charge batteries, make sure everything works. And so we'd end up pushing the thing out the door to get it started. One guy, Jim Monoski, we were pushing, all of a sudden, where'd he go? Well, he went rolling because he stumbled. And so we get the thing running. It was an old Ford Flathead, sounded wonderful. And then really, we didn't do bad, but houses, when they burn, are even now pretty much destroyed. They have to be redone. But it was a simpler time because you'd maybe get 50 calls a year, then all of a sudden it's 200. People who used to not call you, either stayed home and died or drove themselves to a doctor or had somebody take them, would call you for anything. Well, it's hard when you work a job and then have the middle of the night. Some things you gotta go to, you know, and some things you're just losing sleep for no particular reason because it just changed. And then the standard went where you had to be trained like a professional. Well, how do you do that as a volunteer? You can be trained and you go to a lot of training, but you don't get the experience like somebody that works in Auburn or Cantor, like now, where you have nice people that are very good at what they do. But I was on there 37 years and seen a lot of coming and going of things in the fire service and how this changed. Me and another guy, Paul Barnes, were the last two firefighters up here at this station before they abandon it and then they give it to the city.
When you were a kid, was the bakery a big deal?
Oh yeah, you get a dozen mixed pastries for 50 cents. My mother always gave me 50 cents, was you gonna kind of go down and see Iper over here, and he'd give you a dozen mixed pastries, and they were very different. They were good, but they weren't overly sugared, you know, they were just kind of different. Maybe still, I don't know, there's some tough looking stuff we had. But yeah, it was a big deal. The bakery didn't have the restaurant, it just had the bakery. And then my brother was a policeman in town, and he used to go down there when he had night shift to sit at the bakery and watch them do their thing, you know, because it was a night job to get it ready for the day. Probably still is.
Did you go to any burial services that were held at the graveyard?
Oh yeah.
Was that pretty common when you were a kid?
Yeah, a lot of times, even Tom Zumix was not that long ago, well, 10, 12 years. Frank Wing was a town judge. He was quite a guy, I really liked him. His was done at the cemetery too. It's just kind of a cemetery thing, you know, where you, and then they usually had something after, where you'd go up and, you know, have something to eat and talk to people. And it's kind of like Gomer's, you know, it was at the Veterans Cemetery, and then we went up to the Enumclaw to Pete's Pool for, you know, visit with everybody, and people I hadn't seen in years show up, you know. It was pretty nice, really.
Tell us something about Carl Styrett and his business.
Carl and Ann Styrett, they were very central to the town. He had the business, and Ann was kind of the brains behind keeping it going. Barney Carnino didn't like to make bills. He'd fix somebody's car, and he said, well, see how that goes. So everybody in town owed him, you know, and that was the joke. His wife called it the Black Diamond Recreational Center. But Carl was a good business, you know, where he, oh yeah, we'd be down there fooling around all day trying to throw air cleaners over the tire changer thing, you know. And now I think, gee, why didn't I do something to change that? But Carl had a very good system. You got your car, you fixed it, you paid, got your bill, you paid it. If you needed, you know, to charge it, that's fine. he was always telling stories about how people in the town, what they did. You know, there was an old guy lived across the street from his garage. He was telling me he was trained people in first aid for the mines. And he had one guy, Mike Bathlick, was talking about at Labor Day. He was saying, you know, I never had accidents. And Carl says, what are you talking about? You'd come and get me, you'd be in the ditch somewhere, you couldn't remember where, we'd drive all, but he's just that kind of guy where he went and, you know, got him towed out. And Diamond, he grew up here, him and Ann, his wife, and they were very central to the place. He was a pretty good mechanic. Somebody told him, when I was a kid, we didn't have a phone, we didn't have a TV, you know, we had the radio. But when the phones come to town, Carl couldn't talk on the phone. He'd pick it up and he'd hear a voice and he'd drop it. And he said it took him the longest time to get used to that actually working. He always bought German Shepherds, and he'd walk down to the post office with his, St. Bernard's, and he would stop and buy him an ice cream cone for the dog on the way home. And up until he died, he would go to the parts house on his way back from the post office. You know, he just those guys that do cars are always, it's on their mind. My dad worked there on Sunday, and it was open 7 days a week. And Val Sternick, they call him Teeny, and Ed Erickson were the mechanics, and they were very good at what they did. And generally things, once in a while he told me that a guy had a noise in the rear end of his car, so they spent a lot of money rebuilding the rear end. And then the guy drove it and he come back and he said, it's still making noise. So he said, we lifted it up and let it run, and here's the transmission. He said, it just, sometimes this stuff fools you. You know? And he said, so we had to make some kind of adjustment to fix that. That's the car business. And I think a lot of people didn't see any other way, you know, people did go on to be firefighters and do businesses and other things, but I think a lot of people thought they either going to do mechanics or work for a factory or something, you know, just a brighter future was kind of different than now. You couldn't even hope to afford to go to college because of the expense, even though, like you said, it could be cheap. But you didn't have a junior college until, well, 65, I think, is when Green River started, and it was pretty limited at first. Although I know people got good training there. And so anyway,
Carl told me that he added a truck that could pull cars, and people would call him, and, you know, 12 o'clock at night, hey, I ran off the road and I can't get out, can you come pull my car up? And Carl would go. And he said the guy was drunk and he just had too many beers, and Carl would feel sorry for him, and instead of charging him with the full amount he would charge, he would cut it down because he knew the guy, he was a friend. So he quickly got out of that business because it just wasn't worth it all night long, you know, especially on Saturday night.
Yeah. Wrecker, yeah, you got a wrecker. And it should be business. You know, you pull somebody in, you fix their car. But it didn't always work out that way.
Hey, Carl Styrett was a good businessman. He ended up owning a filling station that had bays that he could work on cars, and he walked to work. It was like 2 blocks.
Oh yeah.
And his wife handled all the paperwork, kept the, you know, everything, and Carl would go home for lunch.
Yeah.
And it's just a super good job at owning a filling station. walk to work, your wife does all the paperwork, and
Oh, yeah, Ed
good
Erickson,
combination.
same thing, Ed Erickson, Teeny Sternick, his wife had the Morganville Tavern for years. Same thing, he'd go home for lunch, although he drove. Ray Rosso was in the post office, he would walk to work, and he was a crabby guy sometimes, and I don't know why with us kids, as good as we are, but anyhow, yeah, he did that. He never owned a car. He just lived down the street from the post office, and the story I got is he got kicked in the knee when he was playing soccer. Pooch Perotti kicked him in the knee, and he could never bend his knee after it healed. I don't know whether it was just adhesed or what the problem was, but he always had that limp, you know. And I think he's on his feet all day at the post office because most mail was general delivery or had to be put somewhere, you know. And so it's busy work.
And Carl's, Gomer Evans told me that he would stop at the tavern here in Black Diamond and meet his friend after work. And they were really good friends. And Carl was renting a house from that friend. And one time at the tavern, his good friend says, "Why don't you buy that house that you're renting from me?" And Gomer said, "Well, I don't have that kind of money." And his friend said, "Well, how much you got with you right now?" And Carl, $10. Sold. Carl got a Gomer got a house for
Well, wait a minute.
$10.
This is Louis Draghi. He was a miner up on 5th, and he told him, you come and pay me a little bit every now and then. So he said I'd stop by and pay him, monthly or something. And then pretty soon he said, "Oh, that's enough. You can have it," and signed it over to him. And he lived in that house the rest of his life.
Certainly can't do that in this day and age.
Well, you don't have guys like that. Yeah, Louis Draghi had a mine, and he had his own coal company for years. Was on the end of 5th. Even when he retired, he had like a truck body, and he used the rear end for a winch to bring his car up. So he would go down and load coal and come up to burn in his house. And when I was a kid, there was a guy here one time was saying, "How come people don't burn coal?" Well, I can give you a million reasons. One of them is it's a lot more work than turning up a thermostat. And you had to fill a hopper, and then it stunk if it wasn't working right. And then you get these things. The ash was like, we call them clinkers. They were big gobs of stuff you had to fork out of there, and where do you throw it? At the time, we could throw it across the street because there was nothing there, but now there's a street there. And it just seemed like a dumb idea, and it was cheap, probably the cheapest you can get. Jules Delfsano had coal and oil, and he's another businessman whose wife saved the day, I think. I don't know if he'd ever admit that, but yeah, she was the brains of it. When I first moved here, my wife called me at work and says, "The stove quit. I think it's out of oil." I said, "Well, call Delfsano. How do you spell it?" "Well, I think it's D-E-L. Well, she looks, it's not D-E-L, D-A-L. And she says, "Well, what am I going to tell him for an address?" I said, "Tell him Sam Downey's old house." And she said, "I can't tell him that." "Yes, you can." So she calls Gert and said, "Where do you live?" "Well, Sam Downey's old house." "Oh, I know where that is." That's the way it worked. The roads on the fire department was confusing when it was the Lake Sawyer Road here. Even people like Jules would come in, "What's the name?" Because he delivered oil, he knew where everybody lived. So you give him a name, he knew where we were going. You put a dart in the wall, there's a map to let everybody know where you're at, and they want to come down and help. And so, yeah, very, I guess you might call it refreshing kind of life when you think about it. Everybody, the first fire I went into, everybody's hollering at each other and fighting. There was used to be a barber shop over here, and it either got tore down or fell down, and Joe Romito was working the tavern. He'd go burn the stuff because he was tired of looking at it. Well, then we'd come and put it out. Everybody's mad. "We've been down here 5 times. Why don't we put it out? Why don't we just let Joe finish?"
we don't have to come back.
you know. Yeah, that was a time when I had a gas shortage in the early 70s, and people started using their wood stoves, but the chimney had been rotten since the 40s. It would catch fire. So you had a lot of houses burn. Some of them, 3 of them inside each other, that burned because of the fact that they didn't inspect their chimney before they did it.
Shall we call it a day?
Sure.
Hey, you have been great. We asked you a question and you talked for a half hour.
That's the way it works.
It's got the stories.
Okay, I think that ends it.